How you going, Flynn?
I'm good. I think you guys can hear us now. Sorry about that. I was saying hi. I was doing everything Bill was saying then, but we'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are streaming and creating from today, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'm here with the awesome Bill Hope. Thanks for letting us know that the audio wasn't working. It's always good. Glad I'm keeping my eye on chat. But yeah, thank you very much. But as Bill said, we're going back to basics, introductory course, talking about kind of getting started in digital drawing. And we have the master with us, Bill Hope. So we really encourage questions. He's always too shy, but I like saying it. Sounds back. Okay, great. But yeah, so we really encourage questions today. We're going to go through kind of opening up Photoshop for the first time, how it's different, with digital drawing as it is for perhaps graphic design or photography and things like that. We'll get started.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, and definitely ask questions in the chat. We're keeping it super simple today, so no question is too basic or too simple. I'm very happy to talk over anything. So if we can go across to my Photoshop screen, hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
And let's get going. So when you open up Photoshop for the first time, you get this sort of introductory screen. It shows you maybe some files that you've had before. You can do some lessons, all kinds of things, but we're just going straight for it. We're just clicking the blue button on the left for new file. So when you open up a new document, it's going to give you a bunch of options. A lot of people ask me, like, what size should I be drawing at? And it's a difficult thing in the digital realm because size is very much a relative thing. When it comes to like physical dimensions, about 10 centimeters long or something like that, that's kind of less relevant to how many pixels you're using. And so that's just a little measure of dots across an image and how many of those you have and how much information or resolution there is in it as an image. But again, because we're keeping it simple, let's not get too deep into that. And you can just click on, across the top, you've got some different options for preset templates that Photoshop has. And let's just go with an A4 piece of paper, as basic as you can get. So I'm going to open an A4 piece of paper in landscape, and let's just give it a name. Let's call it Adobe Live Stream Drawing. And that's it. And we press create, and here we are. We are in Photoshop. And yeah, it's Photoshop's, I kind of think of it as like, I'll be drawing on screen here. Kind of like an iceberg. You probably only need the very tip of the iceberg there, but there is all of this, which is information that you may or may not need. It's a huge program and it can be a little intimidating. So what I want to do today is just try and keep it as simple as possible. And we're going to start by simplifying the interface of Photoshop, because there's just a lot of buttons here. There's a lot to look at, and we don't need all of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep a tab here called my layers. I've got that little layers tab here. And then I'm going to go ahead and just delete the rest of that, because we don't need any of it.
Oh, nice.
So all we've got on our right is our layers tab. And on our left, we've got a line of tools here. And you've got all sorts of things that you can do. Photoshop's got a great feature where you can just hover over each and any of those tools, and it'll give you like a really speedy demo of what it does, which is super helpful if you're opening it for the first time. The most important thing we're going to work with today is brushes and layers. So layers in Photoshop, I kind of think of it as if there are a series of panes of glass, and each new layer, you're sort of drawing on a transparent piece of glass in there. And once they're layered on top of each other, you can see through the transparent sections. So if I go over to my layers tab here and we look down the bottom, there's a little plus icon. And if I tap that plus icon, it's going to give me a new layer. Now I can draw on the new layer there. If I made another one, I can draw over the top of it. And you can see those things are kind of kept separate. And that's so much of the principles of Photoshop are working with layers and what's on top of what and what's underneath each other. And it's just a pretty simple concept there, and there's lots that you can do with it, but we're going to be working on just one layer today. So let me just get rid of those. Right, so when you're drawing, the first thing you need is an implement to draw with, and in Photoshop, that's often called a brush. When you think of a brush, you're sort of thinking of a paintbrush or a watercolor brush or something like that, but A brush in Photoshop can be anything. It can be a pencil, it could be a stick, it can be an oil paint brush, it can be all sorts of things. And they're just on this little icon over on the left here. So I'm just going to click on the brush tool. Then if and then I can draw, and you see I've just got a blue color that I'm drawing in. On the left panel, you can change the color of your brush as well, which might be helpful. And I'm just going to open up that, and I've got all these colors here. I've got different hue sliders, so I can choose literally any kind of color I like, but I'm just going to go with a nice simple black one. And then we're drawing.
Actually, I have a couple of questions. Already. Yeah.
Okay, great.
This is great, guys. Really like the questions, so keep them coming. Shannon asks, is there a certain brush or brush size you recommend?
No, I wouldn't really recommend. We're going to use the most basic brush possible, but there are a universe worth of brushes out there that you can download from the internet that are available through Adobe or through individual people. And it's sort of a whole session unto itself of what kind of brushes you can use. Basically, it's good to use something that if you're sketching, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about today, just using something relatively small, so it's not sort of filling up your whole canvas, and you can add a little bit of detail. So for today, I'm going to maybe do 12 pixels across, and that's just a little sketchy brush there. If I zoom right in, you can see it gets a bit pixelated as we get close. But as we're just sort of doing some light sketching, that's all we really need. So I'm using, literally, if you open up your brushes, the first brush that pops up, it's the most basic one there. It's just a simple round brush. So that's all that we're going to use for today. Nothing more complicated than that. Were there any other questions, Flynn?
There was another one. Mary's asking, are you drawing on a tablet or are you using an iPad? Like, are you drawing on a Wacom tablet, I should say? Wacom. Yeah,
I am using a Wacom tablet. So I've got one of their pen screen displays, so I'm drawing on the screen. But many people will use a graphics tablet, which is kind of like a big mouse input that you draw on with a pen. If you really want to be basic, you can just use your mouse. This is me drawing with a mouse. And if you're feeling masochistic, you can use a trackpad on a laptop, but that's not particularly recommended. I've tried it before and it's quite tricky. So yes, I'm using a Wacom tablet. And the main difference with that you'll find is that if I'm using a mouse, you can see me drawing and there's no change in the width of the line. But when I'm using my Wacom stylus, you can see there's differences in the pressure and you get a much more natural feeling line. So I can draw something nice and light and nice and thick by just changing the pressure that I'm pushing down on my tablet.
Right. And just before we move on, there was one more thing which I think is very lovely. Misty said, my niece loved Bill's Christmas book. We read it every night before Christmas. Yes. Oh,
that's very, very nice to hear. I'm really glad they liked it. That's good. I'm working on a sequel as we speak. So there's more coming. They just take a very long time, as you might imagine.
My kid also loves your books, and we read it all the time.
Awesome. That's lovely to hear. So now that we've got a brush in hand and we've got a layer to work on, that's kind of the basics, all that you need. There's lots of stuff that we're going to add to this process, but for the most part, we're kind of drawing here. I can draw a little face, and I've got everything I really need. A very big part of digital drawing is having the freedom to change things as you go along. So I've drawn a little face here, but I might not like exactly what I've done. And so I can undo those things with, like everything else, Command Z. That's something that you'll find yourself using constantly as you go on. So drawing away, Command Z, and you can sort of back up to where you were. Another essential thing that you might find is the eraser. If you go over to your brush panel and drop down a couple, then you've got an eraser there. Or if you're sketching away, you can press B for brush and then E for erase. And erasers are just like brushes. You have all the functionality that you would with a brush, but you're just taking away pixels as opposed to adding them on. So pretty simple concepts there. One other thing that I'll add in, if you're drawing on a tablet, you have the ability to change the width of the line that you're drawing with, but also the opacity of the line, so the intensity of the color that you're putting down. And the way that you toggle that is there's a little symbol up here next to your opacity, and you can click on that, And now you can see the brush gets darker or lighter in terms of opacity, the less I press. And that's something that really gives your drawing a lot more of a natural feel. It starts to feel like you're working, you get similar effects that you would with working with a pencil or something like that.
That's interesting. So you can just toggle it on or off in that situation.
Yep. So I just tap it on and off like that, and I've either got a hard full line or a soft gradiating line. Great. And,
that's what that button
now we're drawing. Yes. Yeah. The thing I find with any program that you're learning, it's great to just sort of get enough education so you can start playing and enjoying it, and try and not worry about sort of the complexity of the program. You're always going to be able to pick up those things as you go along. And as I'm sure has been said on this stream 1,000 times before, even though I've been using Photoshop for 10 years, I probably only know half of what the buttons do. There's a whole bunch of, you're always discovering new things. Okay, great. So I'm just going to erase that bit there, and let's start looking at another fundamental of digital drawing. So one of the, there's lots of difference between drawing on paper and drawing digitally, but you have so much more freedom to edit things as you go along when you're drawing. So let's draw just quickly a happy little man here, and we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at transforming things. So I'm just quickly knocking out this happy little guy.
I like his marshmallow head.
Yeah. Now you can see that I'm moving this image around my canvas. And the way I've done that is I've tapped the keyboard V, or you can see here we've got something called the Move tool. And the Move tool means you can move something around, but you can also change its height, you can stretch it, you can do all kinds of things with this tool. So when you first start using it, it's preset, so it scales in proportion. So you can see the proportions of this person aren't changing, but if I hold down the Shift key, then I've got free control over how I warp this man. So I can make him nice and tall, I can make him a bit shorter, I can do whatever I like. You can also see, while I'm warping this, a little curved arrow has turned up, and I can rotate this man around. And if I'd like to move it in a more controlled way, I can hold down Shift and it will snap to gradients. So I can go 15 degrees, 90 degrees, whatever I like. And that makes that whole process a lot easier. There's lots that you can do with the Move tool, but that's basically the fundamentals of moving things around. The great thing about digital drawing is that you don't have to lock things in. I can say, I've got a man over here, I can duplicate him, have a small one over here. You've just got that freedom to move things easily around the canvas.
Yep.
Okay, so I thought I'd just sort of work on one simple drawing today. And as we're sort of piecing this drawing together, I'll go through a number of the tools that we've looked at so far. And I'll just show you my sort of simple sketching process. And please do drop any questions in as we go along.
Nice. Well, as we segue along there, Alessandra asked a question before. Bill, what's one of the things you were surprised that wasn't not to be so hard to learn? So I think she's saying, correct me if I'm wrong, Alessandra, what's something you were surprised that it wasn't actually that hard to learn? Maybe you thought it was difficult at the beginning, but it wasn't too hard once you kind of got the hang of it, I think.
That's a really interesting question. I don't know if it's just me. I find everything quite hard to tell the truth. I think one of the things I struggle with the most is just a lot of programs like Photoshop or After Effects have been around for a really long time. So they've become very, very complex, which is what makes them really good programs. But as a result, the people designing these programs have a real struggle of how much complexity to show and how simple to make the program so it's easy to use. And there's always a big learning curve of just getting over that first hurdle of the intimidation of a complex program when you first open it. I've recently been teaching myself After Effects, the animation program, and it's just that you sort of want to dive in and start animating straight away, but it's getting over just that first hurdle of like, I just need to get down the basics of what I'm doing before I can start having fun in the program. So that's kind of what this video is about, hopefully just sort of getting rid of some of those barriers to sketching. For me personally, I'd really recommend Ben Marriott's videos on YouTube for learning After Effects. So I think the hardest thing that the thing that was actually easy for me is actually just spending some time sitting down and doing some tutorials and sort of demystifying the process for you, letting someone help you at the start. Once you get into it, you can really teach yourself. But just getting through that first bit, I found once I spent just a little bit of time watching some videos, having the patience to sit down, getting into the program and starting to enjoy it was a lot easier. So I'd just say go easy on yourself at the start, look for help. There's so much of it out there. And then suddenly you're drawing or you're animating, and it's fun again. So yeah. I hope that answers part of your question.
Yeah, and that was a great question. From my part, it's definitely justifying finding the time to learn something. You find it almost like a New Year's resolution that you carry over to the next year, and you think, I didn't actually dedicate any time to doing that. Of course, I didn't learn anything new. That's the hard part I often find.
But once you take that time out, a lot of these things are like Photoshop is designed to be easy to learn, and After Effects is like, people have put a lot of thought into making these things accessible, and you just got to give yourself that little bit of time and not expect that you're going to be able to do it all entirely by intuition, and that really helps.
Absolutely. So Shannon was asking, I believe, around the transform tool that you showed before. Asks, did you group any elements in the human to be able to do that?
I'm not quite sure what you mean about grouping elements together. Perhaps you're talking about like if I was warping something in After Effects, often different sections of the person are broken down into individual elements or layers. I perhaps should have clarified at the start. I'm just working with pixels on a single layer in this program. I'm not using vectors or anything, so things aren't really broken into sections. They're just pixels on top of one layer, so everything's just part of the single object. There's no elements for me to be corralling in any way. It's all part of the one object.
Yeah, and just to kind of maybe just expand on perhaps where the question was going as well. Let's say that you had a base layer and then you had a different element, like say this pencil was holding a cricket bat or a ball in the hand or something like that. Bill could potentially do that on another layer. And if you wanted to move those together, how would you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've just sketched up on another layer there a cricket bat and a ball, so you can see that I can move that around.
Sketching live as I'm thinking about about it out loud.
So we've got those two for various reasons. You might want things to be in different layers. All that I do is I go over to my layers panel and I click my bat and ball, which you can see I'm clicking that little eyeball there to make it appear and disappear. And you just, like many other things, hold down Shift and you select both of them. So now I've got both selected. And again, if I just tap V for the move tool, then I can move them together, I can warp them together, whatever you like. So yes, if you're moving multiple things, and you just need to select multiple things and it'll warp them just the same. But that's, a really good question.
Fantastic.
So you can see I'm just sketching away here. There's a couple of things that I'm doing that I don't know, because I'm using Photoshop so much, I'm kind of doing subconsciously. And one of the main things is moving in and out of the screen all the time. And this is something I do constantly to get sort of different angles or perspectives and make sure I'm drawing the thing that I want. And the way I'm doing that is almost entirely just using the zoom tool. So if you go onto your layers panel on the left, it's the one right down the bottom, the zoom tool. You can either select it there or you can just press Z on your keyboard. And I'm using something called scrubby zoom, which just means that if I move my cursor to the left, it zooms out. If I move my cursor to the right, it zooms in. And I'm just constantly pulling it in and out. It's just a really quick way for me to be able to move around the canvas. The other main thing I'm doing is using the hand tool. And the hand tool just means you can pan across the canvas. And that's just H in your keyboard, or you can find it just above the zoom tool on the left as well. So with a combination of the hand tool, just moving across, and the zoom tool moving in and out, you can find your way all around the canvas.
Lovely.
So with something like this, I've started with a big shape of the outside of the pencil here. So I've done that fully zoomed out so I can just kind of get that main key shape in. And then once I start working on the details, I'm kind of zooming in to get a little bit closer and make the drawing process easy for me. Again, I'm just using the most basic brush, just the single round brush. I've got the opacity setting that we will talk about clicked on, so it's a little bit more sketchy to process for me. And I'm aware that it sometimes looks like I'm maybe making the process look easier than it might be because I've been drawing for a while. But I'm using just all the basic tools here. But because we're kind of largely talking about the interface today, I might not go too much into the process of sort of learning to draw from scratch. But the main thing I'd say is it's just a matter of repetition. I've been sketching cartoonish pencils for a long time. So
you know the anatomy of a cartoon pencil like the back of your hand.
Yeah, it's thankfully a lot simpler than people, cartoon pencils.
I have a question about the transparency button that you clicked again. Just in which case you would use it and which case you would not use it.
Yeah, so with something like this where I'm kind of piecing together the drawing, I'm just loosely sketching like you would on a piece of paper. I kind of don't want certainty in my line because it gets quite messy. If I was drawing a face and I had the opacity turned off and I'm trying to sort of figure out what the nose is going to look like and the line of the eyes, and I'm trying to sort of loosely sketch this face in, you can see I'm kind of like, it becomes messy quite quickly. But right. If I've got the opacity setting on, I can kind of keep everything light and sort of, I don't have to worry about overcrowding the image. That I can kind of, it's like you're sort of drawing lots of lines and sort of waiting for them to sort of, for you to sort of land on the correct line after a while. So I find this a much nicer way of sort of keeping things light and sort of making decisions as I go along. And then once I've kind of made those decisions and figured out kind of what I want my drawing to look like, I might start working on top of that with a harder line once I've got sort of the fundamentals of the drawing locked in.
Right, so you create a new layer on top of it, turn off the transparency and start making kind of a bit more final lines or more refined lines after that.
Yeah. I mean, we're almost up to that point with this pencil character. So I might just do that now. So I've got my layer here. I'm just turning it on and off. And what I'm going to do is just above the layer and the layers panel here on the right, you can see it's got opacity and it's currently set to 100%. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring that slider down to it's about 25%. And I'm going to make a new layer. And now I'm going to start drawing on top of my previous layer. And because I kind of have the, I guess, the sort of the conceptual grounding of my drawing in the sketch, it's much easier for me to work over the top of that and sort of come in with a more confident finished line, I suppose. So again, I'm just going to select my brush. I'm just hitting the right click button to bring up this panel. And in this panel, I can change the size of my brush, the hardness of my brush. So that's again related to opacity. And I've got a big library of brushes, so I could choose all kinds of different effects of brushes. I've got scratchy ones, I've got soft ones, I've got sort of rough inky ones, but I'm just going to keep it really basic and just go with the simple round, which is the first brush that you'll find. It's the most basic preset.
Right.
Okay, and now I can start working on top of my pencil. Actually, maybe I should do a little bit more transforming just to sort of show a few more of the tools that I have. So again, I'm going to grab the transform tool. I'm going to move this character up a little bit, make him a little bit smaller. Once you've finished transforming something, you just need to sort of tell the computer that you've made your decision, and you just do that by tapping enter, and then you're ready to keep working.
Right.
Another really big part of working digitally is the ability to make selections. And that's a really good way of moving parts of your drawing around or editing them as you go. And the easiest way to do that is something called the marquee tool. And it's just a way of sort of dragging a selection box across something. And then I've selected all the pixels that are within that box. And now if I start to move it around, you can see I've just grabbed that square and I could move it wherever I want. One tool that I prefer to use over the marquee tool is something called the lasso tool. That's L on your keyboard, or it's just below the marquee tool there. And you see this little lasso, and that just means I can draw a shape on my screen and the computer will select all the pixels that are within that shape. So I feel like this arm here on the right is a little bit too high. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select it with the lasso tool. I'm going to grab the move tool that we were using before, and I'm just going to drag it down a little bit until it's in a position that I like. And it feels a bit big, so I'm going to shrink it down and maybe move it across a little bit. You can see that it's sort of intersected with the pencil bit, so I'm going to tap E on my keyboard and bring up my eraser and just erase that back there. There's one last thing I'm going to do with selections before we move on, and that's I'd like there to be sort of like a little shadow underneath this guy to show that he's running. And to do that, I could draw a square rectangle with the marquee tool, but I kind of want it to be a circle. So if you tap on the marquee tool and hold it down, you can see I've got a couple of options that have pulled up. And one of those is a circular marquee tool. So I can select any kind of circle shape that I want. So I'm just going to draw a circle underneath our pencil guy there. I can move it around once I've made that selection. And I'm just going to, I want to fill that with color. I could grab my pencil and try and sort of like color it in this way, but it's going to take a long time. So I'm going to use something called the fill tool, or the paint bucket tool. So it's this little bucket of paint picture, a few under the brush. I'm going to click on that, and that will fill any selection that I've made. So if I'd use the lasso tool, I could make some crazy big shape like this, and it will fill in everything within that selection. But if I'm just going back a little bit, the full black is a little intense. So instead I'm going to make that a gray. I'm going to click on my little color selection down the left. I'll choose a bluish gray. I'm going to fill in that color underneath. All right, and that's feeling like it's got a little bit more weight or bounce to it there.
Yeah, nice. Gives it a
How
bit
are we
of
going,
depth.
Have
like,
I completely lost you?
No, I'm here. I'm good. You good?
All good. Yep.
There's a bit of a dip. We'll blame the storm.
No worries. Okay, great. Well, yeah, so I've done what I was saying before. I've just dropped down the opacity using that slider in the layers panel on my layer. And now I'm going to select the layer above it, and we're going to start what people used to call inking. In sort of the old comic book days, people would be drawing these on paper, and then someone would come over the top of the pencil lines and ink it with a brush. And that's basically what we're doing digitally. So I'm going to get my standard brush that we were talking about before.
You have your transparency turned off for this part?
I've got my transparency turned off, and I might make the brush just a little bit smaller on that slider there. You can also access those brush sliders in, sorry, if we roll back a little bit, looking at the interface, we've got our tools on the left, our layers on the right, and at the top we've got a bunch of different panels that we can do a myriad of different things. One of the helpful ones is window, where you can bring up sort of different features that you have within Photoshop. And I'm going to click on the one that is called brushes. So I've got my brushes setting panel here, and this will just give me a bit more control over the brush that I've got. So I can change which brush I'm using, all kinds of different settings, but the main one I want here is just the size of the brush. So I'm just going to make that an 11 pixel size brush. And we're ready to start sketching.
Nice.
Yeah.
Michael in chat said, talking about this character, he's running, so he's an E-racer.
That's very good. What was that?
Deserves a shout out.
Definitely. Good work, Michael. Keep it up. Yeah, if anybody in chat is getting into illustration or drawing or just trying to get a little bit of new information, please let us know. It's yeah. I don't know if anybody's tried.
Do you have a question?
Nope.
If you're ready,
send it over.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. So Shannon asks, when drawing typically, do you rename your layers? And be very careful with your answer, because I could stop the stream right now if depending on the answer.
You know what? I'm going to be truthful. I don't ever rename my layers, and unless I'm doing something really serious. I know that like there are programs like After Effects where you get a lot of layers and things get complex really quickly. And I know there are some militant people out there about naming layers. For a lot of what I'm doing with this, like in some other streams, I've shown some really complex files that I'm working on where you really need to be able to navigate your way around. I like to take, like when I'm sketching, I take a sort of quite a traditional approach of like, I'm just working on one layer, I'm just trying to build up the drawing. So I try not to stress too much about having multiple layers. So I just try and keep it very simple. So I could layer one sketch in one ink, but I know what it is. I can see what's going on. So,
right. But it was like, for an example, like maybe the books that you've made in that situation. Is each page a Photoshop file? And because there's hundreds of elements, hundreds of characters. So in that situation, it's okay if the answer is no. I was only kidding. I won't turn off the stream. But do you need to name your layers in that sort of situation, or is that still just
100%? Okay. Like if I'm doing something complicated, like what I actually often will do is that if I had sort of quite a complex drawing and I was just working on, say, this pencil in the foreground. One thing you can do with layers is put your layers into folders to sort of keep them organized. And I do this all the time. And I almost always label my folders. So I've got my sketch layer here, I've got my ink layer on top, and I've selected both of them. And I'm just going to tap the little folder icon at the bottom of the layers. And I would make that one my pencil.
Right.
And then I can move them together, sort of nicely locked up in that folder. And admittedly, I will label those. So yeah, we're all good there.
Yeah, so it's like time and place. Like if you're sketching, you're doing one particular piece of artwork. You know, there's not that many layers, not a ton of need for it. But if in a professional sense, you're doing something with lots of elements and things like that, it's going to save you time down the track by labeling things and knowing where things are and so on and so forth.
For sure, definitely. All right, I can keep inking this guy. I'm wondering if there's more.
I got a bunch of questions, by the way.
Oh, okay. No, let's keep going with the questions.
If you want to keep inking, and we can, inking question. So Shannon asks, what's your favorite thing to draw?
My favorite thing to draw? I draw all kinds of things. I think just people are probably my favorite thing to draw, but probably closely followed by crocodiles and snails. The big crocodiles sort of like, they're kind of like terrifying and prehistoric, but goofy at the same time. So sorry, my apologies if you hear my dog bark in the background. Yeah, probably crocodiles. That's probably my go-to.
Crocodiles, that's cool.
Yeah.
Unexpected. Yeah. I was expecting dinosaur or something. Very cool.
They're basically dinosaurs.
That's true.
Yeah.
And Kathleen asks, is this your main art medium, or do you do traditional art too? Great question.
I definitely do traditional art, and I definitely started drawing on paper. Professionally, I mainly use digital tools. I don't think I really sort of. I'm increasingly feeling less distinction between the two of them. I mean, there's definitely different. I mean, I never do both. Just you do both. Just do both. There doesn't need to be a better or worse of either of them. So yeah, I think there's huge benefits to spending some time working traditionally as well. But I love so much about digital art as well. So both, yeah.
Nice, lovely. We're getting a few dropouts today, but we'll keep going. So there is a massive storm rolling through Sydney where we're both located. So it's probably not helping the situation.
Disappeared a couple of times. Yep.
Yeah. As Annika in chat says, this is how you know it's live. Yes, We are.
Yes.
We're real. You can tell from the occasional dropout. But yeah, thanks for the questions. They've been really great. I have one more question, but keep them coming.
Yeah.
Do you ever use reference pictures when drawing? That's interesting. We were talking about that a little bit before the stream. Bill has this like encyclopedic knowledge of a lot of things that he's drawn so much over the time. I'm just hijacking in case we get a dropout. We've done streaming sessions where we've drawn pets and things like that, like cats and dogs and stuff, and Bill can just like draws them from memory, like all sorts of different pictures. But every now and then there'll be like a particular dog type. Bill's like, maybe I need to double check that reference because what's the relationship between the ears and the eyes and things like that. But yeah, in your traditional practice, I'll let you answer the question. How often do you use references within your practice?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, there's such a conversation to be had around sort of the benefits and the negatives to using reference, and we've definitely talked through them on the stream before. Using reference is super useful and is something I actually do more than I've ever done before, even though I've got a knowledge of certain things that I can draw from memory. I think reference is always good to have. My only thing I would say is that try and use reference as something that's enhancing your sort of, I guess what you would just call your natural drawing style, as opposed to something that is a sort of a way down on your natural drawing style. You don't want it to dictate what you're doing too much. But I think we're going to be doing another stream on Thursday, and I think in that one we'll drill down a little bit more in ways to use reference if you're doing something that's a little bit more technical. Today I just want to focus on sort of like free sketching. On Thursday I think we'll go a bit more into reference. Very
cool. Great questions, everybody. These are really
awesome. Definitely keep them coming if there's anything that comes up. So at this point, I've kind of got my line work down. You can see I've just turned off the original sketch layer that I had, and I might start adding just a little bit of color to this one. But before I do that, I might just quickly chat over, while we're talking about kind of free sketching, I'll just talk to you about some little tools that I use within Photoshop that are maybe sort of specific to digital drawing that I find really helpful. So if I was drawing, let's say we're going to do a really rough sketch of something a bit more complicated. Let's draw someone who's throwing a javelin, maybe. I don't really know what someone throwing a javelin looks like, so I'm just going to be doing a really rough sketch just to give myself a bit of an approximation of what I'm doing. Not doing anything fancy. I'm just moving the brush tool around, trying to sort of knock out this figure. One thing that I find really, really helpful in digital drawing is the ability to flip things to give yourself maybe a different perspective of what you're working on. So I'm sort of loosely sketching there, so I can zoom out and see if it feels right to me. But what I might do is go to Image at the top here, and then I'm going to go to Image Rotation and flip Canvas Horizontal. And I'm just going to flip that image, and now it kind of gives me a different perspective when I'm drawing, to be able to flip this easily and see what's kind of working in this image. It's like you sort of see it with fresh eyes for a second. And the longer that you spend on a sketch, the less you can kind of really recognize where you've made mistakes. So the ability to easily flip something backwards and forwards, I've got a hotkey set up so I can do it all the time. Kind of looks like he's dancing, is something that's really helpful, and kind of it didn't start with digital drawing, but it's made it a lot easier. If you go to some sort of more traditional drawing classes, they'll have mirrors all over the place, and you see people taking their charcoal sketches up to the mirror and holding up to the mirror to sort of try and get a different angle on it. So it's something people have been doing forever, but it's just made a lot easier with digital drawing. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't realize they did that, like in live drawing classes and things, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. Some people will even have sort of mirrors above them, so they can constantly be sort of just like looking up to reference what they're drawing, to sort of check it against from a different perspective.
It's an interesting ergonomic thing.
Yeah.
Stretch your neck.
yeah, Shift Command F, I find a lot easier.
A lot easier. Yeah.
Yeah. Another great digital drawing tool that's just been added kind of recently is the ability to mirror what you're drawing as well. So say if I was going to draw something symmetrical, I wanted to draw, say, a sort of a Grecian vase or something, as you do. So I'm drawing half a vase here, I'm drawing half a vase here. It's quite important that I get things the same on either side. And one thing that you can do that makes this really easy is using in Photoshop, it's just called the symmetry tool. So I can just drop a line using this, let me just go back to it. When you're using a brush, you can see this little butterfly icon at the top there. Once you've put that down and you start drawing, it mirrors your brush just along the canvas. And something like that's just a really fantastic tool to be able to knock out something that is symmetrical. So my Grecian vase looks significantly neater this way.
Really cool.
And that's a great tool also for doing people or faces. Not everyone is completely symmetrical, but as a rough guide, people should be largely symmetrical. So that's just a really fun tool to play around with to start doing some more accurate drawing.
Oh, wow, this is interesting doing it on a face. Is this something that, I mean, I guess in this particular case, the face would have to be looking directly at you for it to make any sense to do.
It's a funny thing, actually, because, yeah, you can draw it like this, but the longer that you spend drawing with symmetry on drawing faces, they start to look quite weird. And I think part of it is the eyes. People's eyes are never 100% looking forward. They're always fractionally, like everyone's microscopically cross-eyed. And no one's face is perfectly symmetrical as well. So I often use this as like a really rough sort of knockout, sort of like the basics of the face. And then I'm just going to go up to the butterfly and turn symmetry off. And then you kind of start adding some things that make people look a little bit, sort of the imperfections that make someone look a bit more human. So I like to use it as sort of like an early guide.
Yeah, that's great. Like, as in it's like a sketch layer. And yeah, Johanna's said Uncanny Valley. Yeah, it's a little bit like that. Like, just doesn't quite look right. Like, if you've ever seen, even when you've got a webcam, like webcams will have, or a lot of software has like a mirror mode. And often you'll find if you don't have it turned on, you can look a little bit funny, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't remember. Right. Because you only ever see your reflection in a mirror. But if you actually see it from the other way around, that's actually how other people see you. It's like having a good side and a bad side. One of those funny things. I've neglected a question that I unintentionally, so sorry about this, but I did want to cover it because it's actually something we probably should have thought of covering right at the beginning, which is why Photoshop? So the actual question was, do you prefer Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator? You would think from the names that Illustrator would be the illustration tool. So I don't know, Bill, can you like kind of answer that question? Why, Photoshop versus Illustrator for digital drawing?
Sure. Yeah, it really depends on what perspective you're coming from. There's a lot of people who have a different background in drawing to me that maybe their approach has always been digital. And Illustrator is mainly used for something called vectors, which is a different approach to digital art making. In that the drawing that I'm doing is entirely based in pixels. So when you sort of break it down, you can see there are everything is just made up of tiny little cubes of color that make up a bigger drawing. But with vectors, it's kind of like the computer understands inherently the nature of the curves that you're making, so they're infinitely scalable. You can zoom in as long as you like, but it's a bit more of a I guess a software-driven process. You're sort of, if I get a pen tool out, you're sort of drawing curves with the computer and making shapes that way. And it does give you a certain degree of flexibility, but it doesn't have the same sort of looseness that I like with sketching, where you're just using a pencil. So Photoshop's much more geared to something that is sort of mirroring a traditional approach of sketching with a pencil. If you want sort of like complete control over the process, working with vectors is a really good way to make sort of computer-generated artworks. And if you're doing certain kinds of design or animation, Illustrator is a much better program for that. But if you're wanting to do something that's a bit more fluid or natural and is based in a discipline of drawing, then I think Photoshop is much better designed for that. Sorry, that was a complicated answer to perhaps a simple question. But
no,
also,
great.
I got free Photoshop package with my first Wacom tablet, so that's what I started using, and I've just never stopped using it. That's probably the real answer.
The first one's free. Yeah. Speaking in chat, talking about like Team AI or Photoshop. Yeah. I mean, I think that the answer is it depends on what you're doing, of course. We actually did a stream very recently where with Dale Bagini, and Dale Bagini was showing some techniques of sort of illustration using the blob tool and the eraser tool. Check that out if you are like, I know some people just like absolutely love Illustrator or absolutely love Photoshop, and that's fine. Definitely, obviously, try different things, because you might, it happens occasionally and you're like, oh my gosh, I should have been using this app for this thing the whole time. Like, what was it?
Yeah, definitely.
But at the same time, you can check that out. You can get some kind of like natural kind of curves and stuff like that using the blob tool in Illustrator. But yeah. I mean, as with anything, if you can do both, then that's great too. There's no right way to start. But I think just starting out, you're going to have a lot more. It's going to be a lot easier to start sketching in Photoshop if you're just doing loose sketching than it is in Illustrator. Yeah.
While we're sort of doing sort of like the advantages of digital in drawing, I thought I'd just show some sort of more technical drawing approaches that I take. It's pretty quick, but it just kind of gives you a little idea of some of the potential of drawing digitally. And it's one of the things I really love about it. So I can try and draw straight lines as long as I like, but if I hold down the Shift key, it's going to give me a nice perfect straight line, and I can do that horizontally or vertically. So I'm just holding down Shift right now, and I do a lot of live drawing, and people just think I have the steadiest hands in the world, but I'm cheating.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw at the top. I'm going to draw a big square like this. I'm going to make a kind of arc shape. And I'm going to show you just a couple things of how you can duplicate objects and transfer them in ways that become quite interesting. So say I was planning on drawing an aqueduct or a bridge that's disappearing into the distance. Instead of drawing it from scratch as a whole, I can kind of break it down into sections. So I've drawn this kind of archway here, and I can duplicate just this section of the arch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Shift and Option, and I can just drag that whole drawing across. So I'm going to do that a couple times. I'm just holding down the Option key and the Shift key, and it just lets me drag that piece across, and it just drags it nice and horizontally. So now I've got a bunch of arches there. I'm just going to put some ends on that. And now we're going to use the Move tool again. So I'm pressing V to control the Move tool. So I can scale, Now it's opened all of those sections of the arches on different layers, you can see there. So I'm just going to collapse all of those layers down into one layer. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select them all with holding down Shift, and I'm going to press Command E, and that just brings them all into one layer that I can manipulate.
Nice. That's a good like physical demonstration of what we were talking about before about having different elements and grouping and transforming and stuff. So there it is in action.
So I can change the shape of those arches, but what I actually want to do is I want to make it look like it's kind of disappearing into the distance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the tool that so while I'm using the Move tool to transform it, I'm going to right click on the object, and there's a bunch of different ways I can manipulate this object now. I could warp it, where I can kind of drag it around and make a crazy abstract archway, or I could distort it, which is where I can just grab hold of the corners and move them around like this. You get all kinds of cool effects. Or I can use something called perspective, and this will warp the object that I'm making in perspective. So I can just drag on the handles of the sides of that object and move it around as I see fit to make the shape that I want. So if I've done something like that, you can see I've kind of got the shape disappearing into the distance. And say I could use the same Option Shift click as I did before. I can transform it again, and I can start making that into a kind of a 3D object. I'm moving a little bit fast here, but what I'm trying to show is just kind of the ability to take sort of simple actions that you're making in Photoshop, and you find all these sort of shortcuts to really speed up your sketching process, and use the digital tools to your advantage to make something that otherwise would have been quite complex to draw relatively simple.
Plus, you got to get the perspective right and everything like that. But you've just drawn it flat and then got Photoshop to figure it out for you. You've got your grid. There was a question around holding down Option, or is it Alt? Sorry. And to copy something, is it different to Control J, which I think is new layer via copy? I believe it's a similar sort of thing, but you have the control of just clicking and dragging, I think.
Whoa. Well, I've just learned something new. I've never tried Command J before, but there you go. Command J.
So I think if you did Command J, just to jump in, I think it'll literally copy everything that's on that exact layer and create it so everything will be in the same spot, right? But if you wanted to do something like a sequential kind of thing, Option and drag is, Alt and drag, I believe it is an option there. So it essentially will have the same thing, but you might use them for two different reasons. That's my interpretation of that.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, whoever made that comment. I've been going Selection Command C, Shift Command V, which does the same thing, but Command J is a whole lot easier than that.
Shout out to Mary. And that's a great thing about questions in this interactive format, is that we literally learn from each other. And Bill at the start, he did promise he's been using Photoshop forever, and there's still little things to learn. And I've got to say, we've been streaming for almost 3 years here, and I learn new stuff all the time from people. And there is a lot to learn. And so it's important. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, definitely. And with the holding shift or duplicating stuff, that does look like something more technical. But say I wanted this pencil to be thinking about something, I could hold down shift and draw a line and make a cloud there. And I might draw a little bubble there. I'm going to select that, and I can duplicate. All these kind of technical tools can sort of blend into your sketching as well. Yeah. So sometimes it when you start out, all the technical stuff feels kind of impersonal or unnatural in some way. But the more that you do it, my kind of approach with digital drawing is that you're finding as many efficiencies as you can to make the least resistance between what's in your head and what's on the canvas. And the more kind of tools that you have in your back pocket of little hints like the Command J, and you speed up the process, you can kind of get into this sort of flow state of sketching that feels really natural, and doesn't feel like you sort of wrestling this big behemoth of the program.
Actually, that's a great one to end on. We will be back on Thursday. We've literally run out of time. We're going to get cut off in a second if we don't say our goodbyes. Thank you, Bill. This has been fantastic. We survived the storm. Thank you for the fantastic questions and interactions. So wonderful that we're all learning from each other. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Bill, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for all the questions, guys, and thanks for watching. And we'll see you then.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.